The sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and red as Ethan surveyed his barren fields. Each row of crops lay dormant, much like the ache in his heart. He turned toward the old barn, its weathered wood whispering of memories long buried. Lila stood beside the doorway, her silhouette framed by fading light. Her raven hair fell around her pale face, and her wide eyes reflected a sorrow deeper than the silence she held. Ethan approached, the weight of his grief heavy in the air between them. She glanced down, fingers tracing the dirt beneath her feet, then met his gaze. In that moment, he felt a flicker of hope, an understanding that perhaps they were both haunted by the past. Lila stepped closer, her lips parting in a silent promise. She had come to share something that could shatter his world anew, entwining their fates forever. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over fields that stretched endlessly, interrupted only by the silhouette of an old barn. Wooden stakes and faded signs marked a makeshift auction yard. Lila stood at the center, her heart a drumbeat of dread as she looked around at the gathered crowd. She could feel the weight of her brother's hand on her shoulder, firm yet trembling, pushing her forward as if she were a mere commodity rather than his younger sister. The murmurs of buyers mingled with the rustling of straw underfoot, each sound amplifying the pounding in her chest. Fear mingled with the heavy scent of hay, wrapping around her like a shroud. Her brother's voice was a distant echo in her mind, words wrapped in urgency as he reassured her of a better life ahead. Lila glanced at him, searching for the comfort she once found in his presence. Instead, his gaze flickered over her shoulder, his focus lost in the horizon. She felt abandoned, even before the first bid was called, the reality of her impending separation sinking in. The crowd swelled, a tide of strangers whose faces blurred into a sea of indifference. As the auctioneer's voice rose above the din, she felt the ground beneath her shift, a chasm opening where trust had once resided. Ethan stood at the periphery of the encroaching crowd, his weathered hands buried deep in the pockets of his worn jeans. He had come out of necessity, seeking help on his farm, but found himself drawn into a scene that tugged at the frayed edges of his heart. The yearning of the girl captured his attention, her wide eyes reflecting not just fear, but an unyielding spirit. He was haunted by memories of laughter that once filled his home, now reduced to echoes of loss. The sun had taken on a harsher light, each ray a reminder of the life he had lost. He was not here to save anyone, merely to escape the solitude that had settled in the corners of his mind. When Lila was finally presented for bidding, Ethan found himself stepping forward, compelled by an impulse he couldn't name. He watched her, the way her shoulders drew back slightly as the auctioneer called out the numbers, her brow furrowing with uncertainty. She was a delicate flower, edged with thorns, and he sensed the rawness of her pain. He heard the bids rise and fall, each number a reminder of her worth being measured against some unseen scale. He felt a knot tighten in his chest, torn between the pragmatism of his need and the ache of his conscience whispering disapproval. With a final resounding shout, Ethan found his voice and raised his hand, the gesture both foreign and familiar. The eyes of the crowd turned toward him, a mix of surprise and disdain in their gaze. Lila's eyes met his for a fleeting moment, and within that shared glance, unspoken words flared like fireflies in the dusk. He knew he was not just buying labor, he was stepping into a story, yet unwritten, an unwelcome twist in a tale fraught with grief. The auctioneer's gavel hit the wood, sealing a fate that felt heavy with repercussions. As Lila was led away from the gathered crowd, she felt a mixture of confusion and anger swell within her. The man who had bought her was not her savior. He was a stranger, woven into a tapestry of despair, and she was merely a thread pulled taut against his will. Ethan felt the distance between them, an invisible barrier formed by the weight of circumstance and need. Her fear flickered like a candle on the verge of extinguishing, and he wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the knot in his throat prevented any sound from escaping. In the quiet of the barn, surrounded by the scents of hay and old wood, Ethan caught sight of her again. Lila stood rigid, the tension in her body speaking volumes. He wanted to bridge the gap, to assure her that she was not just another burden on his shoulders. Yet words failed him. They hung in the air like dust motes, tangible yet unreachable. He felt the chasm widen with every breath they didn't share, the emotional distance a chiseled canyon where understanding should have flourished. Outside, twilight deepened, wrapping its arms around the farm like an embrace that felt both comforting and suffocating. Lila stood by a window, the last rays of the sun painting her silhouette in shades of gold and shadow. She stared out, half-heartedly searching for a hint of solace, but only the fields remained. Endless, unforgiving. Ethan watched her from a distance, an ache in his chest growing into a familiar echo of loss. He wondered if she'd ever sleep again. In that small, dimly lit space, they were two lost souls, the weight of their pasts heavy on their shoulders, forever marked by the scars that had shaped them. As night fell, they remained apart, the silent specters of grief encircling them, drawing them into their isolation. Lila stepped off the rickety bus into the biting cold, her breath rising in ethereal puffs that vanished into the gloom of dusk. The ranch loomed ahead, its vast expanse punctuated by jagged shadows cast by gnarled trees. A muted sky hung heavy, its slate gray mirroring the weight in her chest. Each step toward the sprawling structure felt like wading through thick fog, her suitcase trailing behind as a forgotten relic of another life. The wind whispered secrets, yet all she heard was silence, a stillness that echoed around her like a void waiting to swallow her whole. Ethan stood at the threshold, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn work pants. The creased lines of his face carved stories of loss and loneliness, each wrinkle a testament to nights spent beneath a blanket of stars, wrestling with memories that haunted him. He barely looked up as Lila approached. His gaze settled somewhere beyond her. He could hardly see her as anything more than an obligation. The ranch had whispered her name in desperation, but she felt more like a ghost, a flickering ember in a desolate hearth. The air inside was stale, thick with the lingering essence of hay and the faint aroma of wood smoke. Lila dropped her suitcase in the small room that would become her own, the bare walls echoing her uncertainty. A single window framed the bleak landscape outside, offering views of the endless fields, where golden grains once swayed like dancers in the wind. Lila traced her fingers along the edge of a dust-covered shelf, its emptiness making her feel even smaller. Ethan watched her from the doorway, his shadow cutting a stark figure against the waning light, a silent guardian of his sorrow. Days melded into one another, the monotonous rhythm of ranch life enveloping Lila like an old quilt, heavy and worn. She learned the ropes quickly, the hard labor of chores that filled her mornings and afternoons. Each sunrise painted the sky in hues of orange and red, but she found no comfort in its beauty. The colors only intensified the sense of longing that gnawed at her. Ethan remained an enigma, his stoic demeanor a shield she couldn't breach. They spoke in clipped syllables, their exchanges practical but devoid of warmth, a ballet of unshared grief. The quiet stretched between them like a chasm, a space filled with things unsaid and feelings unexamined. Lila would catch glimpses of Ethan's haunted gaze as he tended the animals or repaired fences. It was as if he wore a shroud of memories, each glance hinting at a love lost, a partnership severed by fate. She wanted to reach out, to touch the untold stories etched into his skin, but the words always faltered on her lips. She was a newcomer, a girl bought to fill a void, but never promised the privilege of belonging. One overcast afternoon, while cleaning out the barn, Lila stumbled upon an old trunk belonging to Ethan's late wife. Its battered exterior revealed whispers of a life once lived, a treasure trove of memories left to collect dust. She hesitated, heart racing at the thought of intruding on his past. Yet the pull of curiosity was too strong, and with trembling hands, she lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay faded photographs, frayed letters filled with tender words, and the scent of lavender that lingered like a ghost. Among the mementos, one letter caught her eye, its delicate script trembling with emotion. As she read the words, tears brimmed in her eyes. It spoke of love, of dreams intertwined, and of the fragility that life held. It ended hauntingly, a final message that seemed to echo through the silence of the barn. Find joy in the sunrise. It is a gift I leave to you. Lila clutched the letter to her chest, feeling the weight of the finality settle in her bones. And for the first time, she understood the depth of Ethan's solitude, a man holding onto the shards of a shattered heart. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lila found Ethan sitting on the porch, the fading light casting a glow around him, making him appear almost ethereal. She approached tentatively, her heart pounding in her chest. In that moment, she could no longer hold back the truth she had unearthed. I found something, she said, her voice trembling as she presented the letter. Ethan's expression shifted, the stoic facade cracking just enough for vulnerability to seep through. He took the letter, and for a heartbeat it felt like a bridge forming between their worlds. As he read the words, Lila felt an unseen bond unfurling in the stillness, two souls drawn together by the weight of loss. Ethan's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and in that shared silence, Lila understood that they were no longer strangers. They stood nestled in their grief, a fragile connection starting to bloom amidst the barren landscape of their hearts. In that fleeting moment, beneath the vast expanse of the evening sky, Lila vowed to help him rediscover the joy that was once woven through the delicate fabric of life. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep purple as Ethan trudged down the dirt path leading away from the barn. He glanced back, catching sight of Lila through the open door, her silhouette framed by the warm glow of the lanterns inside. When she first arrived, each task had been a daily struggle. She was a city girl thrust into the rough life of a farmer. But now, as he watched her deftly sort through the evening's harvest, there was a rhythm to her movements, a gentle grace that surprised him. Yet beneath the surface, he sensed a current of unease. Ethan stepped closer, curiosity pulling him in like a moth to flame. Lila had an uncanny ability. She needed no sleep, a trait that had both intrigued and bewildered him. While he sank into the depths of slumber, she kept the house alive with a quiet energy. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night to find her sitting at the kitchen table, drawing or reading, under the soft glow of a single bulb. There was an intensity in her gaze, a focused determination that unsettled him, but also ignited a spark of fascination. Who was she really? What dreams danced behind those wide, expressive eyes? Their mornings had evolved into an unspoken dance, a routine punctuated by shared silences and soft exchanges. Lila would prepare breakfast, pancakes or oatmeal, always steaming and inviting as the sun spilled light through the window. Ethan, still half reclined in bed, would delve into the echoes of his memories, recalling the laughter that once filled the kitchen. He often found himself staring at the empty chair across from him, the shadow of his wife looming over them both. It was a ritual steeped in loss. "Do you ever miss it?" Lila's voice sliced through the fog of his thoughts one crisp morning, pulling him back to the present. She was stirring the batter, her focus unwavering. The question hung thick in the air, laden with unspoken weight. Ethan hesitated, the truth caught in his throat like a bitter pill. Was he ready to admit that the house felt colder without her there? "I think about it," he finally responded, his tone heavy with sadness. "But it was supposed to be our dream." Lila paused, turning to face him, the wooden spoon still in her hand. "Sometimes dreams change, don't they?" The challenge in her words flickered like a flame, igniting a tension between them. Ethan's heart raced. He felt a resistance rising within him. He had wrapped himself in grief, his world narrowing down to the land and the memories. Lila's presence began to feel like a crack in the shell he'd built, a reminder that life, real life, kept moving forward. Days blurred into nights, and with them, Lila's nightly vigils became a shared experience. Ethan still found it strange that she would remain awake, her eyes absorbing the moonlight that spilled through the window like a second sun. "Why don't you ever sleep?" he asked one evening, the curiosity gnawing at him like hunger. She looked up from her sketch. The pencil paused mid-air. "I guess I'm afraid of what dreams might come," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. A veil of vulnerability cloaked her words, and for a moment Ethan saw her, not just as the girl he had bought, but as a complex being, rich with her own scars. Their conversations grew deeper with each passing day, yet they were often punctuated by moments of silence that loomed large. Ethan wrestled with an incessant ache, a conflict that tossed him between longing for companionship and the weight of his loss. Lila noticed the shadows that danced behind his eyes, tracing the contours of his heartache. "You don't have to carry it alone," she urged one night, her voice gentle like the caress of a summer breeze. A storm rumbled in the distance, a reflection of the turmoil swirling within him. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the chasm that lay between them, but fear tethered him to the past. Lila, with her insatiable curiosity, seemed to want to unearth the buried memories, yet he held them close, clinging to the fragments of a love that had shattered. "What if I don't want to let go?" he murmured, the vulnerability cracking the facade he had carefully constructed. In that moment, the air became charged, thick with the unspoken understanding that they were both seeking something, or someone, beyond their reach. Lila's gaze softened, a flicker of empathy igniting between them. "Sometimes letting go allows us to hold on to what truly matters," she replied softly, and for the first time, Ethan saw the truth in her words shimmer in the dim light. The boundary between them began to blur, and in that fragile, sacred space, the shadows of their pasts danced together, too delicate to break, yet too potent to ignore. Lila stood in the dim light of the barn, surrounded by the quiet hum of the evening. Her fingers danced nervously over the grainy wood of an old barrel, a relic from another time. Shadows loomed large, stretching across the stalls as dusk settled like a heavy blanket. Ethan was out in the fields, presumably battling with his thoughts, the way he often did since she arrived. Lila had heard the faint whispers of his heartache long before she'd understood the weight of that loss. It sat in the air, thick as the fragrant hay, a constant reminder that the air was laced with something unhealed. She had grown accustomed to his silence, the way he'd often stare off into the distance, as if searching for something he couldn't quite grasp. But tonight, there was an unfamiliar tension, a cautious edge driving her curiosity. Lila's mind spun with uncertainty. The familiarity of her surroundings felt strangely foreign as she replayed the painful words Ethan had spoken only days ago. "You can't bring back what's lost." Could she ever fill the void left by the woman he lost? Despite her sleepless nights, she felt 1,000 emotions swirling within her: fear, longing, and, oddly, hope. Ethan's footsteps approached like an unsteady heartbeat, echoing against the wooden walls. The door creaked open, letting in a sliver of twilight that framed his silhouette. Lila turned sharply, locking eyes with him. She searched his face for a glimmer of the man she had begun to admire. Instead, there was only resignation etched deep in his features, shadows of his grief. "I thought you would be resting," he said, his voice gruff, holding an unspoken tension. I can't sleep," Lila confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not really." She shifted her weight, suddenly feeling like an intruder in a house where sorrow had become the unwelcome guest. "I thought maybe being here, in the quiet, would help." He nodded, but the sadness hanging between them felt like a thick fog, an unexpected chasm that neither wanted to traverse. The silence hung heavily, laced with unspilled words, until Ethan finally spoke. his gaze fixed on the ground. "You remind me of her," he said, the admission hanging so vulnerably in the air. "Lila, sometimes I don't know if I should have brought you here." The confession hung like fragile glass between them, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Lila's heart raced. "What do you mean?" she asked, a mixture of alarm and vulnerability creeping into her voice. Did he see her as a mere replacement for the love he had lost? Ethan's eyes finally met hers, stormy and conflicted. "You deserve more than just being a shadow of her memory," he replied, the words low and heavy. Lila felt a rush of warmth at his concern, yet the thought twisted painfully in her chest. "I'm not trying to be her, Ethan. I'm just trying to be me." In that moment, Lila longed to reach across the divide, to bridge the gap between their two worlds, one filled with heartache and the other with a quiet yearning. "Sometimes it feels like I'm talking to a ghost," he murmured, the vulnerability breaking through the stoicism he wore like armor. "You're alive, but the things I think about, they push you away. I don't want to drag you into my brokenness." Lila's heart ached for him, a wild thrum in her chest. "No one said life is easy," she said softly, "but you don't have to bear it alone." His brow furrowed as uncertainty gnawed at him. "I don't know what to do with you, Lila." She moved closer, her heart pounding with an urgency she hadn't felt before. "You can start by letting me in. Tell me about her. Share the stories that make you smile, the ones that hurt. I want to understand." She could see the flicker of resistance in his eyes, but within it, she felt a crack forming, a window into the storm raging beneath. In that moment, something shifted in the air, a tentative bridge formed between them. Words unspoken, emotions barely contained bubbled to the surface. Lila took a deep breath, ready to step into the storm. "Ethan," she said, voice steady yet soft, "maybe tonight is the night we need to face those shadows together. I may not be her, but I promise to listen." The weight of vulnerability hung heavy, but so did the hope that maybe, just maybe, they could both find solace in shared pain. The sun dipped low behind the fields, casting a golden hue over the farmhouse. Lila stood at the edge of the porch, her silhouette framed by the vibrant glow. She watched Ethan as he moved through the rows of corn, his hands methodically harvesting under the fading light. The air was crisp with autumn's breath, and the scent of soil mingled with the promise of dusk. She could see the weight on his shoulders, a burden that seemed to deepen as the shadows lengthened. As Ethan paused to wipe the sweat from his brow, Lila felt an inexplicable pull towards him. It was more than just a sense of duty. It was an urge to share in his silence, to blend her existence with the man who had brought her home. A gust of wind rustled the leaves, and she shivered slightly, aware of the world that lay heavily upon him. Alone in her thoughts, she recalled the stories she had overheard from the nearby townsfolk, whispers of a man who had lost everything to fate, and how he had taken a chance on her. Lila took a step down from the porch, the wooden planks creaking underfoot as if groaning in unison with her timid heart. Ethan glanced up, eyes catching hers for a heartbeat that expanded like an eternity, and she felt an electric connection, intangible yet undeniable. In that moment, the remnants of his grief met the intensity of her presence. She took another step closer, feeling the warmth of the soil beneath her feet, grounding her as if the earth itself sought to bridge the chasm of their pasts. "Need a hand?" she called, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan straightened, surprise crossing his features, then softened into a tentative smile. It was a fleeting thing, a flicker of light amidst the heavy shadows surrounding them. But Lila saw it. She saw the warmth of gratitude that painted his expression, like the sun breaking through the clouds of an impending storm. It was the first time he had allowed her into his world beyond the walls of the house. He nodded slowly, seemingly weighing the decision. Lila felt her heart race as she ambled towards him, eager to erase the distance not just physically, but emotionally as well. With each step, she clutched the hem of her shirt, feeling the fear and hope blend together like the colors of the sky at twilight. She settled beside him, her hands reaching instinctively for the husks. It was an unspoken agreement. They both needed this connection, this sense of purpose. They worked side by side, silence stretching between them, but it was no longer heavy. Instead, it was laden with the potential of something new, something raw and almost sacred in its fragility. Occasionally, their eyes would meet, and in those brief exchanges, Lila felt a flicker of understanding pass between them, binding two lonely souls. A world built on loss began to mend, stitch by stitch, under the fading light. "What was she like?" Lila finally asked, risking the silence that surrounded them. The question hung in the air, waiting for Ethan's response like a moth drawn to a flame. His hands stilled momentarily, and she could feel the tension radiating from him, as if the weight of their shared reality had just intensified. He took a deep breath, the kind that rattled the chest as he fought against memories that crashed over him like waves. Ethan's eyes turned distant, fixing on a point far beyond the horizon. "She was everything," he replied, his voice heavy with unspoken words. "Determined, full of life. She believed in the beauty of this land, even when it was hard." Lila sensed a surge of emotion behind his words, each syllable like a pulse echoing through her chest. In that moment, she wanted to reach out, to ground him in the present, to let him know he wasn't alone in the echoes of what could have been. In that shared space, amidst the rustling corn and the fading light, Lila placed her hand over Ethan's for a fleeting moment, a simple gesture that felt monumental. There was warmth where their skin touched, a silent acknowledgement of shared grief and the tentative hope of new beginnings. Lila held her breath, allowing that spark to linger, weaving a thread of connection that for the first time felt like an imprint of something beyond understanding. Lila stood at the edge of the fields. The horizon stretched before her like an unturned page. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced across the golden wheat. She felt the wind whip through her hair, a gentle yet persistent reminder of her existence. Each gust whispered stories of the world beyond her grasp, but Lila remained anchored in silence. The weight of words unspoken clung to her throat, a tight coil of fear and longing. It had been days since she had first glimpsed Ethan's sorrow, a deep well of grief that made her heart ache with empathy. Yet, the longer she kept her silence, the heavier the burden became inside her. Ethan was in the barn, his silhouette outlined against the fading light, a figure carved from the shadows of despair. He moved with the rhythm of routine, his hands grabbing tools with the precision of a man who had mastered the art of solitude. Lila had watched him tirelessly, noting the way his brow furrowed in concentration and how the soft lines of his face fell deeper into the creases of sorrow. Despite the distance she maintained, a part of her wanted to bridge that gap, to wrap around him like the crops that embrace the earth. But how could she, when every word felt like an avalanche waiting to crash? Her nights were plagued with flashes of memory, fragments of a past life swirling like smoke in her mind. She could feel the urge to speak building like a storm cloud, yet each time she opened her mouth, the words hung just behind her lips, bound by an invisible chain. The final words of his wife echoed in her ears, a haunting refrain that pulled her deeper into her own conflict. Would sharing that burden only sink Ethan further into despair, or might it offer him the closure he needed? Lila looked back at Ethan, his shoulders slumping as he leaned against the barn door, the fading light illuminating the sorrow that dripped from him like rain. A flicker of something ignited within her, a desperate impulse intertwined with compassion. Could she shatter her silence, or was that the cruelest thing she could do? The pulse of her heart quickened as the urge to connect wrestled with her fear of tearing open wounds that had yet to heal. In that moment, she realized that her silence was not just a shield, it was also a prison. The sky above swirled with hues of orange and violet, as if the universe itself was conspiring to help her break free. Lila inhaled deeply, the scent of earth and fading sunlight filling her lungs. She took a step forward, her heart racing with the knowledge that she was about to confront her deepest fears. The ground beneath her feet felt both solid and fragile, a reminder of the risk she was about to take. What would it mean to set her truth free, to speak the name of another in the space that lay between them? "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. The two syllables hung in the air, heavy and reverberating. His head snapped up, eyes wide with surprise, as if he were seeing a ghost rise from the ashes of his past. He took a hesitant step toward her, the distance collapsing like a time-worn facade, and for a fleeting moment, hope flickered in his gaze. But with that came vulnerability, and vulnerability was a dangerous precipice to navigate. With one more breath, Lila summoned the courage she had kept buried for too long. "I know what she said," she found herself saying, the words pouring out like a dam that had finally broken. "Your wife." Before she left this world, she whispered something important. The confession hung between them, a gossamer thread connecting their fractured souls. As the words spilled forth, the heaviness in her chest began to ease, replaced slowly by a sense of clarity. She was no longer just a specter of silence. She was a beacon of truth. Ethan's face transformed, a flicker of comprehension igniting in his eyes. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice trembling, laced with both fear and fervent hope. Lila could see the crumbling walls around his heart, the cracks that allowed light to seep through. This was a moment of vulnerability, not just for him, but for her as well. The question lingered in the air, ripe with anticipation, as they both stood on the brink of something profound. As she took a step closer, Lila realized she was no longer just the girl who never slept. She was a vessel for a voice long silenced, ready to share the weight of a truth that could perhaps heal them both. The shadows of the past loomed large, but for the first time, she felt the power to let light in. In that fragile moment, she understood that the journey ahead would be fraught with uncertainty, but there was no turning back. The words were unleashed. It was time. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue over the fields that had been both Ethan's sanctuary and prison since the day he lost his wife. Lila sat on the edge of the old wooden porch, a gentle breeze tousling her unruly hair while the crickets began their evening concert. Silence filled the air between them, thick and heavy, until the moment swelled with unspoken words that trembled in Lila's chest. She had seen the grief etched on Ethan's face like a weathered stone, and for the first time, the chasm between them felt insurmountable, yet she sensed it was time to bridge the gap. Ethan leaned against the porch railing, his calloused hands gripping the wood as if it could anchor him to the earth amidst the swirling storms of memory. He stared into the fields, haunted by shadows of laughter that echoed in his heart, reminders of a life stolen far too soon. Lila had been his solace, a strange presence who had reshaped the contours of his days, filling them with layers of eccentricity and life. Yet, the absence of sleep plagued her, rendering her an enigma he struggled to decipher. Just as the sun began its descent, something inside him surged like an unchained force, yearning for connection. As the last rays of daylight caressed the land, Lila finally turned her gaze to Ethan, her deep-set eyes gleaming with unshed tears. "Do you remember the stories you used to tell?" she asked, her voice soft, yet weighted with urgency. Ethan blinked, the memories flooding back. The nights wrapped in warmth, sharing tales of the past, the dreams they dared to dream before reality shattered them. "Yes," he replied, voice taut with nostalgia. "I remember them all." Lila's heart raced. The way he spoke her name and recalled their shared moments ignited a flicker of hope within her. Yet the air thickened with tension, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down on them both. Lila rose, her fingers brushing the grain of the wood as she moved closer to where he stood. "You were brave, Ethan," she continued, stepping into the open space between them. "You carried the world on your shoulders while mourning what was lost. But you aren't alone anymore. Ethan felt the pulse of her words resonate within him, the armor he had worn since the day of his wife's funeral beginning to crack under her gaze. "Lila," he whispered, but the name lingered on his lips, tangled in a web of vulnerability. As she approached, the wind caught her hair, drawing her closer as if nature itself understood the gravity of this moment. In that instant, Lila felt a surge of courage, the walls encasing her heart crumbling with each step she took towards him. "You deserve to know," she murmured, trembling slightly, "what she wanted you to understand." Ethan's breath quickened, the memories of his wife flooding back with vivid clarity. "What do you mean?" he asked, fear intertwining with hope, a dangerous cocktail. Lila hesitated for a heartbeat, summoning the strength buried deep within her. "She spoke to me once," Lila said, her voice resolute now. "In those final moments when she knew she was leaving, she told me that you need to let go, Ethan. She wanted you to find happiness again, to live, to breathe, to love." The weight of Lila's words crashed over Ethan like a tidal wave, sweeping away the debris of grief that had long anchored him to the past. His heart thudded against his chest, and he searched her gaze for truth, for a lifeline amidst his despair. "What else?" he urged, the tremor in his voice betraying the torrent of emotions within. Lila stepped even closer, their breaths mingling in the cool evening air, a fragile moment that shimmered with possibility. "She said your name," Lila continued, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it reverberated in the silence that enveloped them. In the haze of her pain, she uttered Ethan like a prayer, a plea for you to remember her, yes, but also to move forward. She wanted you to be free. The world around them faded, the gravity of this truth binding them together as two souls caught in the swirl of remembrance and yearning. Ethan felt the dam within him burst, emotions rushing forth uncontrollably. "Lila!" he choked out, her name spilling from his lips, heavy with gratitude, pain, and the glimmer of something more. In that moment, he found solace wrapped in the warmth of her presence. They stood together, the shadows of the past shifting slowly, whispers of hope tinging the air. With Lila at his side, he could finally begin to see a path forward, one that honored the love he had lost while embracing the possibility of love anew. In the quiet embrace of the setting sun, the horizon bled shades of orange and violet, a canvas of healing. Lila stood barefoot in the dew-kissed grass, her silhouette framed by the golden fields that whispered secrets of days gone by. Ethan, his hands calloused yet gentle, knelt beside her, their fingers brushing the earth, weaving together the past and the promise of tomorrow. A single butterfly danced between them, its wings trembling like the echoes of love lost. Lila caught the fleeting creature, cradling it delicately in her palm. With a soft breath, she opened her hand, watching as it took flight, a symbol of release, of memories that would soar unshackled. Ethan's heart tightened, the weight of unspoken words lingering in the twilight air. He reached for her, his hand covering hers, the warmth of their touch igniting a quiet understanding. Together they gazed up at the sky, where the first stars began to pierce the veil of dusk. In that sacred silence, there was no need for words. Time stood still, as if the universe had paused to honor their journey. Two souls entwined, a promise forged in the light of compassion, carving a new path through the shadows of grief.